So the Pac-12 now has 8 teams for 2026 after adding Texas State earlier this summer. And now they've met the benchmark for being an actual conference according to the College Football Playoff or the NCAA, whoever's running this thing. So I want to know, where do they stand in the hierarchy of conferences, and what does this mean for the conference going forward? And I think the first part of that is pretty easy. Like, are they a power conference or not? And it's pretty obvious with the lineup that they have for 2026. As it currently stands, they are not a power conference. But then you look at where do they stand in the hierarchy of what is now the G6. And I think that they have a pretty good standing when you start to look at it. The Pac-12 is no less than the second best G6 conference come 2026. And I think that there's a real argument for them to be the number one conference in the group of 6 in the first year of the new alignment. Because yes, the American, the leader in the clubhouse, has Army, has Navy, Tulane, Memphis, all these teams that had a real shot at making the college football playoff last season. And especially when you look at like Army and Navy, because they have a chance to play Notre Dame, they have that outside game. Memphis is a team that I'm really looking at for this upcoming season to make the college football playoff. They don't have Boise State, who is the strongest brand in G6 football, and they probably have been that since their game against Oklahoma in the Fiesta Bowl. I mean, they've consistently found a way to be in the national spotlight while being in the second tier of conferences, whatever that second tier has happened to be. And they now get to join forces with two teams that, if you were a Pac-12 fan, you know that Oregon State and Washington State were almost never the worst teams in the Pac-12, and they definitely weren't the worst teams over a run. You're looking at teams like Cal, maybe Arizona, probably UCLA as those teams that really, or actually Colorado for a long time, teams that couldn't hack it as far as competitive football in the Pac-12. Oregon State was never a game that anybody wanted to play. Any of the bigger teams that had to go to Corvallis, or as a Ducks fan, having to go play in Corvallis, any of the Civil Wars, it's never a game that you want to play. And you definitely don't want to go play a cold game on the Palouse in the middle of the afternoon on a Saturday, because you know that game is going to be piss and rain and a tough team that throws the ball all over the field. So even though they weren't the strongest brands in the Pac-12, and that's evidenced by them being left behind while everybody else found a spot in a power conference, they're definitely some of the close to mid-range football programs from the Pac-12 even now. So you add those 3 teams together, and you got this Oregon, Washington, Idaho alliance, not to mention Fresno State, who has had some really strong seasons in the 2000s. San Diego State has also been a solid team, as well as Colorado State. Utah State has been up on the upswing, and they get a foothold in Texas. I think that you could make an argument that right away the Pac-12 is stronger than the American. The real thing that's holding them back is they only have 8 teams, and they just get to that bar of being an actual conference. But if you're the Pac-12, you're not just looking at 2026. You say, okay, we've got it back together for 2026. We get to play some real football. The winner of our conference has real chance of going to the college football playoff to make some real money for the conference. And if they can string a couple of those together, they're looking at 2031. The next time that the college football playoff media rights deal comes up, and they're saying, can we pull a couple other teams in and not just be the best G5 team? Can we start to push to bring the Power 5 conversation back after we make some more realignment? Now, it's not extremely obvious that it would fall in the Pac-12's favor the next wave of conference realignment. I think what's most likely to happen is that the Big Ten and the SEC are probably going to try to pull more teams into their conference, which I think is so stupid. We're getting so bloated with these conferences. But I think part of that could work in the Pac-12's favor, because the first 2 schools that you really look at that could migrate back to the Pac-12 would be Cal and Stanford. They've been one of the strongest brands in whatever the Pacific alignment of college teams has been since the 1900s, obviously being some of the oldest universities on the West Coast and some of the most prestigious universities on the West Coast. And they're playing in the ACC right now. And even though it doesn't really make sense for football to be flying across to play Syracuse or Miami or North Carolina, whoever, on a regular basis, it definitely doesn't make sense for their Olympic sports or their women's sports to be doing that, which that's what they really lead at in the country, is Olympic sports and women's sports. They're at soccer and all these things that are not football. Football is not their strong suit. Stanford obviously has had a great run. Cal, a long time ago, was good. But it's not going to continue to make sense to get a little bit of extra money in football and lose their ass on every other sport because they're flying back and forth 2 times a week from the West Coast to the East Coast. So I think that you really can see Cal and Stanford, because they really were just kind of left at the dance with no partner, and they happened to find the ACC, who probably doesn't really need them with 18 teams. Probably the ACC is going to lose Clemson, lose Florida State, maybe lose Miami as you get into this next wave of realignment. And then it makes a lot more sense for Stanford and Cal to go back to the Pac-12. And then say that happens, you get to 10 teams. I think that's a strong place for the Pac-12. You got 4 former Pac-12 teams. You got 5 former Mountain West teams and Texas State. You're really looking good there. But maybe doomsday hits for the ACC and Clemson, Florida State, Miami. They all leave for the SEC or the Big 10 or whatever thing that they've got going on. And the ACC is kind of left for dead. And I don't think that Cal and Stanford moving to the Pac-12 is dependent on that scenario. But then you start to look at SMU. And SMU, I think, for the most part, would want to stay with the ACC. But if they lose those big brands and SMU starts to look at one of the power teams, I don't think you're going to be getting quite the same media deal from the Syracuse, Duke, UNC, SMU conglomerate as you're getting now. And then SMU starts to question, why am I going to Virginia every week? Why am I going to Syracuse every week? Why am I going to North Carolina every week if I'm not making a shit ton of money? And they might start to look at the Pac-12 and say, all right, well, there's a Texas school there, and there's some California schools, and they're really starting to build something. They're starting to be the power conference as far as G5, G6, whatever the layout is. Maybe they start to look over there. And then you got 11 teams. Let's just say they can somehow peel the 3 Western-ish teams from the ACC. And then you have 2 teams in Texas. You got the 5 teams from the Mountain West. You got 4 teams now from the Pac-12. You're really starting to put something together there. And I think once you get to 11 teams, you're really going to have your pick of who you want in the G5. And you start to look at other Texas teams like North Texas, UTSA, UTEP, who just moved over to the Mountain West. Any of those teams that are in Texas, Sam Houston, in Texas, but not a power team, could really start to look at the Pac-12 and say, a Texas, California, Pacific Northwest power conference starts to, maybe if it's not a power conference, start to look at least like a G5 all-star conference, which might just be enough. Because even the conferences like the ACC and the Big 12, with what they're currently putting out with the 5+11 playoff format, might be looking at just getting 1 team in per season. If you put that all-star conference together, you might be looking at getting 1 team in the playoff every season. And that really starts to corner the market as far as the G5. That's so much more money than sending your team to the Pop-Tart Bowl. So I think that the Pac-12, while they might not be the number 1 group of 5 conference in 2026, although they have an argument for it, definitely is the best positioned conference going forward. Now, they're never going to be the Pac-12 again. I think that, unfortunately, so much greed and so much, not just greed, stupidity went into the downfall of the Pac-12. They put someone in charge in the 2010s when they were at the point where they could become a top 3 conference. They could be up there with the SEC. They could be up with the Big 10. They should have been. The Big 12 was about to fall apart. The Pac-12 stuck their nose up at Boise State, stuck their nose up at actually going after Texas, actually going after Oklahoma, and went after Utah and Colorado, who were good ads, but didn't see the future, that you needed a big conference for college football. And they worried about the Olympic sports. They worried about the sports that didn't make money. And now a lot of those schools that were a part of that are going to lose those sports in their colleges because they can't afford to pay for those sports to play in the conferences they went to make money in football. And you can look at USC and UCLA and them making the first move and really get on their ass. And yes, I think there's a good part to that. But you have to look at conference leadership from the 2010s, not making a point to get the biggest games on TV, chasing after the Pac-12 network, chasing after Pac-12 After Dark, playing games when nobody could watch them, when those games were amazing games. Playing late night games in the desert, the biggest teams going to late night games in the desert, those were amazing games that would have made for great football if you played the game at fucking 5:30 Pacific instead of 7:30 Pacific. People aren't staying up on the East Coast to watch Arizona State versus Oregon at 12:30, 1 o'clock at night. My dad, who's a big Ducks fan, wasn't even staying up till 10:30 Pacific to watch the game. It's a Saturday night, but people still go to bed. And there was just never the thought process that maybe there is something to getting a bit of an East Coast viewership in your games. And that showed in the rankings. Even though the Pac-12 had better teams than were in other conferences, they would get lower ranked because people weren't watching their games. And that's just as much on the people that are put in a position to vote as it is people put in a position to put those games on national television. And the Pac-12 let it all slip away, and that'll never come back. But Oregon State and Washington State, who are left for dead, have found a way to put a conference together that at the very least is going to continue to be one of the top G6 conferences for the foreseeable future. And if they really want to, and if they can get past some of the grudges that they undoubtedly have with all the teams that left the Pac-12, they could get a couple teams back into the swing of things. They could get a couple teams that have been overstretched by this crazy realignment thing and make the Pac-12 something of at least recognition. Something that at least gets national recognition, that has to be in the conversation. Unlike a lot of these group of 5 conferences that don't get a part of the conversation, the Pac-12 can at least be part of the conversation. And that's all you can ask for at this point. Thanks for watching that video. Make sure that you like and subscribe. And if you made it this far, make sure that you leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Is the Pac-12 anything of note at this point? And what do you think could actually realistically happen in the next 5 years with conference realignment leading up to the college football playoff media rights deal? If you want to watch more of my videos, I do have those for you. I had one of my most popular videos this last week, the perfect Power 5 for college football 26 realignment remix, right here. So go ahead and check that one out. If you're playing college football 26, it's a great way to get started on your dynasty. I have my first version of that video, the perfect Power 5, which I did in the spring, which is a more realistic one, but go ahead and check that out. Let me know what you think. Other than that, I've got my subscribe link on this side, and we will check you next time. See ya!